Welcome, everybody, to the Skate of Thrones podcast. I'm Kasey Kazliner, joined alongside Jackson Smith. And last time we talked about the Kings on this show, Jackson, they were in the dumps. They had lost some games that they should have won. They just played poorly, but they've been better. They went on the road, won some games. They only lost one game since we last talked about them, and they lost that game in a shootout to Nashville. So they've been better. They've been gathering points. How are you doing this week, though?
I'm doing great. It's hot. I'm always excited when hockey season gets into it, and we talked a little bit last week about how they still hadn't found their game, and I we definitely harped on the negatives a lot, and I mentioned I still have confidence that this team is going to find their game, and I think they've started to do that. They've, like you mentioned, they very successful road trip. They took 9 out of a possible 10 points. This now actually winning some games that maybe they should have lost. So that's always a good sign. You always want to start stealing some games, but encouraging road trip by the Kings, and they hope to come home on Thursday and pick up where they've left off.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those games. I mean, you alluded to maybe winning some games they should have lost. Last night, against San Jose up at the Shark Tank, they were outshot 40-14, and they still won the game. And it was a weird game because the Kings led 3-0 at one point over San Jose and still managed to blow the lead and then eventually win thanks to Brant Clark and some other players. But I mean, the Sharks looked like they were going to potentially tie or win up the game when it was all said and done. What were your thoughts on that game last night? And are you concerned that they blew a 3-0 lead? They were still able to win, but we've seen them do that multiple times this year.
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well. Very weird game. I'm actually not concerned, and I think because in games like that, fifth game of your road trip, you're obviously tired and ready to get back home. You need your stars to step up and be your stars, and I think that was the case last night. Drew Doughty had a big goal. Brant Clark showed up big in the late moments with the third period goal to take the lead, and I think it was as yes, they might have gotten outplayed, and they got outplayed pretty badly. But I think it was impressive that they stayed within themselves. Darcy Kemper kept them in the game, and they pulled out a win in regulation, which is something that they've struggled to do this year. So I actually am, even though they got outplayed last night, I'm pretty impressed by the fact that they were able to come out of there with 2 points in regulation.
Yeah, I am too. And I think one of the big storylines that came out of that game was Philip Deneau, the third line center that we talked about quite a bit last week, who has really been just a consistent piece of this team for years. A guy you can play both ways, a guy that you can stick on the penalty kill if you need to, a guy you can put on the power play. He's been on that second power play unit. But he was one of the players that didn't see much time. He played just under 11 minutes. Only one guy last night, one forward, played less time than him, and that was Jeff Malott. And he only saw like 40 seconds of playing time in the third period, 2 shifts. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, personally, I think, he had a couple of giveaways in that game against San Jose. And, I know Philip Deneau is not a guy, he hasn't scored a goal yet this year. He's not a guy that's going to provide you a lot of offense necessarily, but he can move the puck well. He's, I think, one of their better puck moving uh, forwards. And I think for a guy who's defensively minded, he can win puck battles. What were your thoughts on the sort of benching? It wasn't an official benching, but it seemed like one.
Yeah, I think that was just a situation to try to give a spark to the scoring touch, and they clearly needed to start pushing back against San Jose and in offensive zone, and they weren't doing that. I wouldn't look too much into it. I think Philip Deneau plays a very specific role on this team. He's the third line center. He's the defensive checking forward. He goes at every shift. He can kill penalties. He can win face offs. Like, that's a very valuable piece to have in a lineup, and I think he's going to be just fine. I think the season where he put up a 20 plus season, I think that was a couple years ago. I think that was more of just I don't want to say fluke, but it was definitely a little bit more on the irregular side from him. That's not who he is. He's going to be the guy who's going to score 10 goals a year, maybe put up 30, 40 points. He's going to play great defensively, kills penalties, all that stuff that you need if you really want a forward roster with a lot of depth.
Yeah, one line we talked about a lot was that third line, but
Mhm.
another line that's really impressed me is the fourth line. I mean, we saw Corey Perry score the opening goal last night. He's been really good, and we really didn't talk about him too much because last time we recorded together, he hadn't played yet because of his injury, but he's been really good around the net. He's a guy, obviously, you can play special teams with. And then Jeff Malott. I mean, he had a goal last night, a snipe. I didn't really know he had that in him. A guy who, the penalty minutes have been kind of high for him, and I know that's been a problem with the Kings that we can talk about in a moment. But I think Jeff Malott's been very impressive. He's a guy that can kind of do a little bit of everything. He can do the dirty work, but he can also score. And I think having that on your fourth line, especially seeing how kind of inconsistent the Kings' fourth line was last year with Trevor Lewis and Tanner Janot and guys like that. And then you also throw in Alex Turcotte, guy I think definitely deserves more playing time, more ice time. Jim Hiller has been weird with some of the younger guys and very, quick to scrutinize their games. I think maybe the exception would be LaFerriere because I think he's moved up the ranks pretty well. But I love the fourth line. I think the Kings' bottom six is one of the better bottom six groups in the Pacific. That third line's been good. Obviously, we'll talk about Warren Foegele and his injury in a moment. He's, losing him is a big hit to that. But I think when you move Armia up to the third line and see what he's able to do there, that really gives that fourth line a lot of character. And I really like what they've been able to do with, Jeff Malott. He's a young guy. He's kind of not afraid to do anything. He can leave it all out there. Corey Perry has that veteran experience. He can, play on special teams. He's been able to get net front. He's also doing the dirty work. And then Alex Turcotte, a guy who really just, leaves it all out there as well, but a guy who has a really good scoring touch, good stick handling, good hands. What's your thoughts on that group?
Yeah, mentioned a little bit last week about the Kings' offseason moves, what they should have done, what they didn't do. And, I talked about how instead of going out and improving the top six, they went out and improved the bottom six. And the bottom six was already pretty darn good
Yeah.
last year, and it got even better. And I think we also mentioned the injuries last Monday when we recorded, and how that's part of the reason that they were struggling. And I think Corey Perry coming back into the lineup, and it's ironic given his age and the rivals that he's played
Oh,
on.
yeah.
But I think his presence in the lineup makes a huge difference, and it's shown. He's got on the score sheet a couple times. He's can play on special teams. Uh, just adds so much more versatility to that group. And I've noticed a couple from some of these games. Alex Turcotte is sometimes the most noticeable guy on the ice
Yeah.
when he's out there, just with his speed and forechecking ability. That is a really valuable asset. And yeah, his name might not be showing up on the points lists, and he might not be putting the puck in the net, but he has that ability to, and he has the ability to drive a line and get the puck back in the offensive zone. And you've got other guys who can kind of alternate between that third and fourth line, like Yoel Armia and Philip Deneau, like we just mentioned. So I really like that fourth line. Like you said, they've been playing great. I've been really impressed by Perry and Turcotte, and I think that's a big reason why we've seen this little turnaround from the Kings this past week and a half.
Yeah, and with the injury of Warren Foegele, we can talk about that as well. I mean, that takes a hit to the bottom six because you have to get creative if you're Jim Hiller. Losing a winger like that who's just been very, very good. He's, the guy that we talked about last week is, as much as people want to criticize the Kings for some of their signings, he is one that definitely hit on. He's been very good ever since he's come to the Kings. It's pretty obvious why. He can kind of do everything. He's good net front. You can put him on the power play. But he's injured, and we don't really know what his timeline is. When they last talked to Jim Hiller in the media, he said, he's going to miss some time, and it's pretty ambiguous. It could be a week, it could be a month. We don't really know. But Armia has stepped in on that third line, and I think Armia has showed some really good, flashes of a two-way player. But not having Foegele, and we talked last week about the third line and how cohesive it's been. It's been that same three really for a year at this point too. So losing him is going to be tough. But I have faith that the bottom six is still going to be solid. And by losing him, maybe a guy like Alex LaFerriere could step up more. And I think he's been kind of itching for a role like that. We saw him break out early last year. I think he's been really solid this year. I mean, LaFerriere is a guy who can rip it. He's got a good wrist shot. He's again kind of a guy who you can put in a position that's difficult, and he can play like a veteran when he needs to. And I mean, the first line is healthy again, which is important too. Kopitar back, centering that line with Kempe and Kuzmenko. And that's a line that I feel like, I mean, we can talk about Kempe because he's had some really good overtime winners, one against Dallas.
And the celebrations, too.
Celebration,
Yeah.
the horns down, that was pretty funny. So, what's your overall thoughts on the top six? We talked about the bottom six, but this past week or so, what have you liked from that group?
Yeah, I really like what I've seen from Alex LaFerriere, a guy that got off to a slow start. He's picked it up big time, had a big goal against St. Louis on that breakaway, really nice backhander. And then the other night in Chicago, sniped one past the goaltender. He's been great, and he's been given the opportunity to have more ice time and play in a bigger role, especially when Kopitar was still out. He's answered the call. I think he's done a pretty good job. Hiller clearly has confidence in him, and that's a guy the Kings are going to need to step up. Kind of the internal improvement that they're going to have to see if they want to make up for some of the losses this past off season and potential losses with Kopitar ahead. So really impressed. Kempe, he looks great. Over a point a game. He's a guy that could finish realistically right now with 90, 95 points this season.
Yeah.
And definitely, I think there's some regret in the press box for not getting him signed earlier this summer. But um, he looks fantastic. Kevin Fiala has looked great.
Yeah.
Byfield, I think, whenever he gets the puck, the defense knows that Quentin Byfield is a threat. He might not have the stats that have jumped off on the like on the point sheet just yet,
Yeah.
but he'll get there. I think it's more impressive though that guys like Kempe, Fiala, Kuzmenko, they've kind of meshed and they look really good.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really talked about Byfield a whole lot, and I think that's kind of for a reason, just because, like you said, he's at 8 points with 2 goals, 6 assists, but he has some of the highest XG on the team, and I think we were talking about this a little bit before we went on the air here. You know, he's a guy that typically takes a bit to break out. And I think if you're a Kings fan, like maybe you don't hit the panic button, but that's something that you'd like to be quicker. You know, for a guy who was a former number 2 pick, and maybe that's the criticism that you see with Byfield. Also, you know, some of the discipline and just carelessness with the puck sometimes that we see from him. But he has some of the highest XG on the team, which you know I know a lot of people don't put a whole lot of stock into XG, but it does mean something. It means that he is creating shots. He is getting to the net, and him and Fiala you know, are pretty inseparable as a duo, as a pair. And so to put them with Laferriere, we saw some of that last year, and that really helps Laferriere mature and get better because those are two guys who have such good mesh together. I agree with you. I think Laferriere has been really impressive. I think he's a guy that needs to have a top 6 role. I feel like when he gets buried and doesn't get much ice time, that's when you start to see his confidence hinder a bit and maybe, you know, his production dip a little
Hmm.
bit too. And some of that goes with just the team not being healthy and him having to you know, step up. And it feels like the Kings have been pretty unlucky with injuries to start this year, as we know. And then that top line, I agree. I mean, let's talk before we get to the back end, let's talk about Kempe because obviously there's been a lot of rumblings about his contract. I've seen some tweets these past few weeks and days, you know, about him kind of warranting money upwards of 11.5 million a year. What's your sort of take on Adrian Kempe's contract situation? We know he's going to be a free agent soon. What do you do if I know it's big picture because we're only, you know, a handful of games in. We're still in the first month here, but what's your approach if you're the Kings right now? I mean, he's a guy that's putting up goals and points every night, it feels like.
Yeah, I think letting Adrian Kempe walk would set this franchise back 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I think I think it's a bit like a Kirill Kaprizov situation in Minnesota. I'm not comparing Kempe to Kaprizov because Kaprizov is on another planet,
Mhm.
but he's your guy. He's the guy. He's the leading scorer. He's a point per game player, probably a 100-point player in another system. I think Jim Hiller's defensive first system does not help his point production, but he still has 14 points in 11 games. Um, they should have signed him over the summer. They shouldn't have lowballed his contract. I think their first offer was 8.5 to 9 million, and now, like you said, it's being reported that he wants closer to 12. The Kings are at around 10 right now. Well, Logan Cooley just signed an 8-year extension today, worth 10 million a season, and he's only been in the year for a couple. Only been in the season. I only been in the league for a couple seasons. So if you're the Kings, you have to get Kempe signed before that price goes up higher because it's going to keep climbing as the cap keeps going up. That price is going to get to 12, 13, 14, 15, and the Kings are just going to be sitting there. He's going to play himself out of their spending books.
Yeah, Daily Faceoff reported 7 hours ago that the Kings and Adrian Kempe are pretty far apart on contract negotiations. And I think it's interesting because if you look at last season or the year before, you know, fans and the media have talked about the thing the Kings are missing to go on a run is scoring winger depth. You know, like they don't need a flashy center right now necessarily. They have we've talked about it. They have guys like Byfield. Kopitar has still got it a little bit. You know, Turcotte's good on the fourth. You know, I can keep going. Like they have the center depth, but the scoring wingers have been sort of the X factor. Like Kevin Fiala has taken a big step from a couple years ago, and he's been a really big part of that scoring. But we know that the market right now in the NHL, there's inflation when it comes to scoring wingers. You know, like
Oh, 100%, especially in free agency.
yeah, like there's so many wingers who can play defense and you know kill power plays and whatnot, and that are valuable. But guys who can put the puck in the back of the net and play well with whatever center they're with, Adrian Kempe exerts that perfectly. I mean, he's been with Kopitar for a while now, but you know, he is a guy that you put him in any system, he's going to thrive. He's that talented. We've seen those game-winning goals. He's got a beautiful shot. He can move the puck well. He's shifty. He's swift. I think I fear he's gonna walk. But do you think there's any world where he gets traded?
I don't think there's a world. I'd be shocked
The
if he
Kings have
gets
too much
traded.
pride. Is that the issue?
I think I think they have to. I think they'll eventually get him re-signed. I think it's just going to come down to what price they eventually cave into his demands for. And I think it's going to be higher than they wanted to give him originally, um, especially in this era of the NHL where so many guys are being re-signed. And part of that has to do with the salary cap going up. I mean, we looked at the incoming free agent class. We're like, oh, Jack Eichel's going to go to the market. Connor McDavid's going to go to the market. All these guys, they're being re-signed by their teams. Kirill Kaprizov got re-signed. It's because the cap's going up. Teams are able to dish out that money now to their star players, and they don't want them to walk. So if he hits the open market, there's going to be a bidding war. He's going to get overpaid. You have to overpay now for free agents. Look at Nick Ehlers. He's been horrible so far for Carolina. He's making $7.5 million a year. The highest paid free agent besides highest paid free agent forward this past offseason. So if you're the Kings, you have to keep him in house because I just don't see internally or externally who can replace him.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to free agency right now, he's the best free agent forward available.
Yeah, and I think if you look at you referenced Ehlers, like that wasn't a great free agent class either,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, maybe Kempe was, wondering if he was a free agent then, how much money he would have gotten. And now with the cap going up, that could go up even more. Like you said, I agree with you. I think they need to re-sign him. I just wonder if they will, or like, if it comes to a bidding war, are they going to put up the money for it? Like, I just feel like the identity of the Kings right now doesn't feel very clear in what direction they want to go. And it's not like Kempe is the youngest guy ever either. I think he's a guy that, can play a lot more years in the NHL, and he will, but he's not like a 23-year-old who's that raw. We know how good he is right now. He's reached his potential, which is very, very good. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a really tough predicament if you're the Kings because you should sign him. But at the same time, I don't understand. Like, I'm not saying I would resonate with the Kings for not paying him, but at the same time, it's like if you sign him to a max deal,
You can see the argument for holding off.
yeah, because he's gonna be overpaid, whether or not you consider that an overpay or not. I think just because of the inflation, but also the direction the Kings are in right now, it just feels very unclear. You have Kopitar retiring. I mean, Kempe also might not like that uncertainty. He doesn't know who he's going to be centering his line next
And
year.
you have Brant Clark that you got to dish out an extension to after this season. Now he'll probably get a bridge deal,
Yeah,
but that's you never know. Maybe he wants a long-term contract. Maybe he says I proved enough, and he wants one of those. You know, we've seen so many young players get those type of contracts now, where they're getting $9-10 million a year for only playing a couple years in the league.
speaking of Brant Clark, let's talk about the back end a little bit.
Mhm.
Unlike the forward lines, the defensive lines didn't change at all since we last talked here. But Brant Clark has been, I mean, if I'm going to go as far as saying the Kings' best player, but he's up there in the top three, I'd say right now. Just like so far this season, I think Kempe and Kemper, and you can make the argument for some others too. Maybe I'm leaving some guys out, but Brant Clark's ability to move the puck and score, and I mean, he had the game-winning goal last night in a game where like we said, the Kings were outshot by almost 30 shots and probably shouldn't have won in San Jose, but Brant Clark did an incredible job, dishing out the puck, moving the puck, and he gets the game-winning goal on a really great play. Overall, a play that kind of allowed him to showcase his offensive ability, and we know his defense has been sort of the criticism part of it. What have been your thoughts on Brant Clark so far this year?
Yeah, I think he's clearly the most noticeable defenseman on the ice. Now, granted, his defensive game needs some work. It's not perfect, but that's what you drafted him to be. They knew his game out of college. What's so confusing to me is that guys like guys like this offensive defenseman, they get drafted because of their offensive ability, and then the team puts them in the doghouse because they can't defend as well as they play offense. It doesn't make any sense. Now, yes, this was a um, this was a previous regime's draft pick. It was Rob Blake. It was not Ken Holland. But at the same time, he was getting the same kind of treatment under Rob Blake's team than he is now under Ken Holland's team. So you drafted him for your offensive ability. He needs to be out there on the ice more than right now. He's the least played defenseman on the team, and you're a team that's struggling to outscore your opponents right now. It doesn't make any sense. He needs to be out there more than every other defenseman besides maybe Mikey Anderson. And he needs to be the guy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was rewatching that goal he had last night against San Jose. Like his ability, he plays like a winger, and his ability to just trek up the ice, know where the puck is on a kind of a broken play, a play where the Kings were in transition, and we've talked about this year the Kings and the fact that they play a transition game on offense, and when you have a game like that, and you need to play quick. Like Brand Clark's perfect for that.
Yeah.
When you're playing, you know, corner to corner and net to net hockey, you need to have a guy like Brant Clark move the puck.
Especially since you traded Jordan Spence this past offseason. I
Exactly.
know we talked about this a lot last time, so I don't, I don't want to get into the
Sure.
same rabbit hole here, but he needs to be on the ice more than he is right now. He's been very impressive. His game's matured a lot. There's still more work to be done, but you just can't be playing Cody Cece and Joel Edmondson more minutes a night than you are Brant Clark.
Yeah, just for some context, like you talked about it a little bit. The leader in time on ice last night in terms of defense was Dumoulin, who I think that's pretty valid. He's, been I'd say a
He can play big minutes,
top
yeah.
three, defensemen. I know there's only six. That's not saying a whole lot, but Mikey gets nearly 21 minutes. Clark only gets 13 and a half minutes. He's the only defenseman get last night who got under 20. So like you said, and he has a goal and an assist. He's +3. Every other defenseman for the Kings is either negative or just +1. Again, he did have a penalty. He had, he had two giveaways, like sure, but again, when you're playing like a forward, and I think he's such a polarizing player because I think there are a lot of Kings fans who kind of talk about what you're saying. Like you know, they're understanding that this is a defensive minded team, and when you lose a guy like Spence, and you have such a good goalie in Kemper, but he still needs help. Especially with how many goals the Kings have given up this year and how many penalties they've given up this year. I understand the criticism of Brant Clark's defense, but like you said, you know what you're getting out of him. Like
Hmm.
trade him if you're not going to utilize him the right way. And I fear that might be. I'm not going to speculate anything, but we saw what happened to Jordan Spence. Like history tends to repeat itself.
Now, I will say, part of the Spence trade, and this was reported by Elliot Friedman, is the Kings didn't have room in their future for both those guys. So I think that
Yeah,
them trading Spence sends a message to Clark that, hey, you're safe here. We're not going to trade you. You're being really pessimistic about all these guys. You think
I
everybody's
know.
going to get traded. I don't think it's that. I'm not going to be that apocalyptic about. It might be Halloween this weekend, but I'm not. I'm not going to be that apocalyptic about the future of these Kings young players. I think Hiller has a lot more confidence in him this year than he did last year.
I agree. I think we can maybe both agree on this. And if you don't, like, feel free to say so. I think it's hard to be a young player on the Kings right now because you still have to deal with being buried to some extent, and you don't really have opportunity to kind of showcase what you're good at. Like I think a lot of these guys are trying to be. I think Hiller and company are kind of fitting these guys into a system which has worked in previous years, but I think with some of these guys who are just raw, like Turcotte is still raw. He's been in the league for some time now, but he's still a guy that you got to let him just show what he can do. Especially in early in the year where like the stakes aren't as high yet. You're not in the playoffs, and we saw what Hiller did in the playoffs, not really benching some of these guys and taking away TOI from the younger guys. I think you got to let some of these younger guys do what they can do, and I think we've seen that with Byfield. But I think the difference with Byfield is he was a number 2 overall pick. Like I just think the consistency with some of these younger guys is not always standardized, and I think that's why I'm being a little more pessimistic. But I think with that being said, though, Clark has done a phenomenal job. We can look at the rest of the defense as well. Cody Cece, I think, has played better. I think there's only going up from what he was doing the first few games. He had a really good sequence, though, the end of the game last night against San Jose, where the Sharks had a late power play down 1 because of a really dumb penalty by Joel Edmondson, where he just flicked the puck into the 20th row, delay of game. And, CC was on the PK and blocked 2 Shark shots. And the Sharks, power play isn't like top of the league or anything, but you've got guys like Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, who, we know how good they've been as a duo. And Cody Cece blocked some shots at the end there the clock eventually expired. So that was huge. Anyone else, though, we talked about Dumoulin a little bit, stand out to you on the back end?
Yeah, I think that Mikey Anderson has done a fantastic job filling the shoes of Vladislav Gavrikov, and
Yeah.
I think he's one of the most underrated defensemen in the National Hockey League. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit. He's way underpaid. I I I think he's He's really, really good, and he should be getting paid a lot more money than $4.125 million a year. The Kings are happy that's what they're paying him, but they've got that for beyond 2030. Um, he's the unsung hero of that group. He's probably the best all-around defenseman on the roster. If I'm a Kings fan, I'm getting a Mikey Anderson jersey because he's going to be around for a while and he's going to be a staple of that back end.
Yeah, and his volume too. Like he's a guy that can play a lot of minutes. He can do a lot of different things. We've seen him play with a guy like Gavrikov, and I think he learned a lot playing with
Oh, 100%.
Vladislav. Like, I think
100%.
you could tell last he made that leap on the defensive side. I mean, I think Mikey is a guy that, is gonna be just so cherished for years to come. I wholeheartedly agree. Um, you know, that's pretty much it for the back end. But another guy who came back that was injured last time we talked is Darcy Kemper, and he has been incredible. I don't know if we're surprised. I mean, he's been really great ever since he put on a Kings uniform for the second time. But I think relieving the sort of pressure that was on Anton Forsberg, because Forsberg actually got a bit better. You could tell he maybe had some ruffled feathers after that Pittsburgh game where he gave up 3 goals or whatever that he shouldn't have, and I think he got only better from that game going forward. But I think the tandem is looking solid. Like I don't think the Kings are losing these games because of the goalies. I mean, we talked about the defensive issues, but I really think Kemper's done a great job.
Yeah, I think they're definitely better than the 895 save percentage that they're posting right now. I
Mhm.
think I think that's a little bit misleading. A couple of those early games that with inflated goal totals, but I think overall this tandem's good. I think you can rely on the tandem for a long stretch of the season, which is what is important when you're finding a backup goaltender so much better than David Riddick. Big upgrade there. I think Forsberg's had some good moments as well, but clearly Kemper coming back has kept the Kings. That St. Louis game, they don't win that game if Anton Forsberg's in goal. That's simply because Darcy Kemper put the team on his back, and you can argue the same thing last night. Um, from him. But
Yeah.
yeah, this tandem is pretty good. Kemper's looked great. Forsberg's been better too, so I've been impressed. I think they're both going to keep getting better too as the season goes on, and as the defensive core meshes and continues to grow as a group.
Yeah, no, I agree. And looking at the schedule too, because we've kind of covered all the players here, but the
Tough
King,
stretch coming up.
tough stretch, and they haven't won a game at home. Now, granted, they played some tough teams at home. You open the season against Colorado, then you play a team like Pittsburgh that's actually started pretty good at the gate. And the Kings probably should have won that game too, but that's a whole story. Then you play Carolina, team that's always touted as a cup contender. But the road trip, the Kings have won all their games on the road, as we know. They've only lost, I believe, one game on the road, and that was the Nashville game in the shootout. And that game was I thought really interesting too because you know, it was a weird game. Brant Clark had an incredible performance in that game, and Forsberg just couldn't get it done in the shootout. And I thought the Kings' shootout performance was a little weak. It went extended past the allotted rounds, but looking forward though, like you said, it's a tough stretch. You come back home for 4 games. You play Detroit, New Jersey, Winnipeg, Florida. There's some winnable games there. What's your thoughts on that upcoming stretch?
Definitely a tough stretch. I think that they should expect out of the 8 possible points. I think if you can get 5 points out of this possible eight, I think that's a win. New Jersey is one of the best teams in the league
Yeah,
right now.
great.
You can say the same thing about Winnipeg and Florida. If they're able to win 2 out of 3 games, that's huge. Detroit, I think that's a must-win game. You need to get a win at home. Um, this is kind of a litmus test. These next 4 games of where this team really is. Is this team a playoff team? I think we're going to find out these next 4 games.
Yeah, and then we can also check in here on the Pacific standings, which it's been a really interesting division. I mean, there's some predictability there. Kings are right there in third. They're tied for second technically with Seattle. I mean, I think we're at the point in the year where I mean it's obviously very early. All these teams have played 10 or 11 games or so, but I think we're starting to see which teams have kind of gotten a rhythm so far. And hockey's all about capturing that momentum and rhythm. But I really do think though that the Kings, and we talked about this a little bit before we went live, but there's certain teams that it doesn't really matter, how they play early on. If they have a certain level of talent, they're going to be able to go a level that they're going to reach their floor. And I think for the Kings, I don't know if I'd necessarily say their floor is the playoffs yet, but I think it's awfully close. And I think we're starting to see this team has the talent, and if they can keep staying consistent on that first line, like it all starts at the top and it trickles down. When you bring back Kopitar from injury, you can just tell, the production from the top is going to be, uh, you know, is going to trickle down to the bottom. And I think that's something that they've emphasized, these past few weeks with him back. And I think they're right up there with those other teams. I think Seattle's a little bit misleading. I think they're a solid team, but I don't know if they're quite there yet. And of course, Vegas is in first, but Vancouver hasn't looked that great. Obviously, San Jose and Calgary have been bad. What's your thoughts on the Pacific though right now?
I think I think besides Vegas, the door's wide open for this
Yeah.
team. Edmonton looks iffy. I think you're right, spot on Seattle. I think that's a little bit of a mirage. I think Anaheim will keep improving throughout the season, but this Kings team is the Pacific Division's open. They have a chance to put themselves into a good playoff position, and maybe finally avoid the Edmonton Oilers in the first round. I mean, we'll see. They have to be more consistent. They have to. This road trip was really impressive. Keep winning 4 out of 5, and you're going to be in really, really good shape.
Yeah, one guy we referenced but didn't really dive in on that I want to just briefly talk about is Andre Kuzmenko. I think the first line, it's easy to just group those guys into one group because they've just been so good ever since Kuzmenko's joined the team. But 2 goals, 4 assists. He's +3 right now. I mean, we knew he was good, but his ability to just stay consistent. He hasn't had a point since that Nashville loss. He had an assist in that game, but I mean, you talked about this with Byfield too. His ability to just do his job. He's not a guy who's necessarily going to be scoring a ton of goals, but he's a guy that can win puck battles, can move well in the neutral zone. He can set up his teammates, and we know how good the first line has been, especially with Kempe scoring all these game-winning goals. It feels like every game, even though it hasn't, but it feels as such. What's just your overall assessment of his game so far?
I love Andre Kuzmenko's game. I think he's one of my favorite players in the league to watch. We've said it a lot here. He plays a very specific role. I think he does a good job doing it. Has a scoring touch. Might not be the fastest guy out there, but he's going to always give it 100% on the ice. And I think guys like him, and especially Philip Deneau, they now yes, you have to make it first, but I think in the playoffs, those two guys are so valuable to have when the games get tighter, when there's less room on the ice, when it's a tightly checked game and everything's under the microscope. I think those two guys, that's where their game shines. And yes, it might not be as flashy during the regular season. That's when you'll have guys like Byfield and Kempe lighting the lamp all the time. But Kuzmenko and Deneau and Trevor Moore, those guys are all there for a reason. And it's for when those games get tightly checked, when you can't make a mistake, when you have to make something happen, when nothing looks like it's going to happen. Those are what those three guys are for. And Kuzmenko, I think, exemplifies that perfectly.
I 100% agree. And before we wrap up, one more area of the Kings I want to talk about is special teams. Honestly, power play wise, they haven't been terrible.
Better.
They've been better since we last talked. They're 15th in the league, around 20%. And I think that goes with just Kempe being Kempe
Mhm.
right now, and just with the direction they've gone. And we've seen the power play change quite a bit. They were originally a 5 forward power play, and that's changed. But I think it helps when you get a guy like Corey Perry back, and you have other guys that can step in that role. I mean, again, we want to see more Brant Clark, and he's a guy that I think has dabbled on the second power play unit, but isn't getting that much looks on it. So I don't have the exact TOI there, but I think he maybe got a couple seconds on the second power play unit against San Jose. But it hasn't been bad PK wise. It's always gonna look kind of skewed just because the Kings give up a lot of penalties, and
Yeah.
that's been a big problem. But what's been your thoughts on the
I,
special
I
teams?
was just going to say, if they want their penalty kill percentage to get better, super simple, take less penalties.
Yeah,
You can't be killing 5, 6 penalties a game. Get it down to 3 and kill all 3, and then your percentage is going to go up.
yeah, they've given up only 6 per play goals, but that's their kills only 76%.
I think a good comparison is in baseball. When you're facing a starting pitcher for the third, fourth time, it's the percentage that hits, your batting average goes up.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean.
When you're facing him for the first or second time, you're less likely to get a hit. You're less likely to get on base. Same kind of concept, I think, with the penalty kill. When you see their power play more often, they're going to score more goals. So stay out of the box, stop taking penalties, and the penalty kill percentage will get better.
Especially like on the fourth line, because like some of
Mhm.
those guys like Malott, for I know the type of player he is, he's very scrappy and physical, but if you're giving up power plays on the fourth line, it kind of messes up the rhythm and the system of it because those are guys that are there for a specific reason, to kill time or I feel like with the Kings forward line, it's different because that's a group that can actually score goals. But I feel like right now they're kind of doing the opposite of, from a discipline standpoint. Malott, I like him as a player a lot, but I think the discipline has not necessarily been where it needs to be. So that needs to get better. And we saw, I think Quentin Byfield's discipline has gotten a bit better.
Hmm.
It was sloppy at the beginning of the year, but
Well, and I think one thing that we didn't even talk about with Byfield is, uh, yeah, yeah, the goals might not be showing up yet, but he's playing almost 20 minutes a night.
yeah.
And if you want a guy to take over as the star, that's exactly what you need to see. And the fact that he's been playing well with that ice time, I think shows more than anything else that he's done
Yeah, and again, to your point, he's playing the most average wise,
in his
TOI,
career.
the
Yeah.
most he's ever played. And he has 8 penalty minutes, but I think if I'm not wrong, I think most of those penalty minutes came like the first 3 or 4 games. So, because he had a few really bad penalties. Since then, the penalty leaders actually Kempe and Malott leads by far. He has 23 penalty minutes, but we already talked about that. Like
Yeah.
that's just kind of the player he
It's
is.
also the game he plays. He's gonna
Yeah.
check hard and he's gonna take some physical penalties.
And I think Kempe makes up for it with his offense. But still, you want to be cleaner if you're the Kings there. Edmondson had a bad penalty the other night, like we talked about. So, yeah, I mean, we'll both be at some of the upcoming games in person to report on. Do you have any sort of final thoughts about this week and kind of heading into the next one?
Looking forward to it. They're going to have to step up on this homestand. I'm really excited to see how good this team really is and if they're going to be able to hold up against the league's best competition. We know that they were the best team in the league at home last year. We'll see if that continues this time around.
Yeah, looking for their first win at home, but we'll say goodbye for now as the Kings look for some improvement going forward. They've been good this week. They have some tough matchups going forward, but the homestand will be an opportunity for them to get better. But we thank you guys for tuning in to Skate of Thrones. Kasey Kazliner joining alongside Jackson Smith as always, and we'll see you in the next one. And have a great rest of your day.